Ontario Premier Doug Ford is urging the federal Conservatives to be more liberal and cater to all Canadians rather than sticking by Pierre Poilievre's own principles.
U.S. fighter jets were called to Vancouver International Airport after a small plane was allegedly hijacked by a climate activist in Victoria.
A CBC report released on Wednesday blamed podcasters such as Joe Rogan and Andrew Tate for rising divorce rates. Hello Canada, it's Friday, July 18th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Clayton, DeMaine.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is calling on the federal Conservatives to avoid what he calls, quote, political extremes and embrace a middle-of-the-road approach that blends progressive social values. During a recent remark published in a Calgary Herald column, Ford said, quote, "It can't be one extreme or the other. You can't be far left or hardcore right." Ford, leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario and critic of federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, said the party needs to avoid governing, quote, based on your personal beliefs and instead focus on what voters actually want. He said, quote, "You've got to have a social heart too." His comments come amid internal Conservative conflict following Prime Minister Mark Carney's minority re-election victory and ahead of a National Party convention in January. In a move that raised eyebrows among fiscal Conservatives, Ford even defended Carney's Brookfield credentials, praising the Liberal Prime Minister's corporate background. He said, quote, "There should be a law that you can't be Prime Minister unless you've been involved in a business at a high level." But for all his talk of moderation and pragmatism, Ford's record tells a different story. Clayton, Ontario Premier Doug Ford doesn't lack his critics. In fact, if you read some of the comments online, he gets criticisms from quite a few different angles, both from the left and the various shades of the right, including more libertarian types or more socially conservative people. What are the main criticisms of this progressive conservative view the Premier of Ontario touts?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that there's no absence of criticism against Ford from the right. One big area is that he's not even fiscally conservative. Since 1965, as that was the time that Fraser Institute decided to start collecting this data for a report, they said that Doug Ford had spent more of the taxpayer dime annually than any other premier in Ontario's history, barring only Dalton McGuinty in 2010. Ford's spending has led the province into a $86 billion hole, and he's a strong believer in anti-free market policies such as corporate welfare, and even included tariffs in his policies against China to protect all of his investments into the EV market. True North just released an article noting another EV plant has closed its doors in Montreal, for example. The demand is just not there for this, and he's spending all this money into that. Now, it became mainstream to rag on Ford as someone who's more of the progressive part of his so-called progressive conservative government. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation has criticized Ford and his government for giving themselves raises and pension hikes. Ford will sometimes push out sound bites that keep conservatives appeased for a time, but when push comes to shove, the criticism is that he folds like a pretzel. If you recall, on election night, Conservative MP Jamil Javani blasted Ford and his campaign manager for, quote, sabotaging the federal Conservative campaign throughout the election. He said, Jamil Javani said, that Ford spent more time propping up the Liberals than backing Conservative politics.
He has taken the provincial Conservative Party and turned it into something hollow, unprincipled, something that doesn't solve problems. He's glad-handing with Chrystia Freeland, having coffees and lattes with Mark Carney. And I'm sitting here saying we need to be fighting for change and something new and something different, not being a hype man to the Liberal Party.
It's telling that Ford essentially said a leader shouldn't stick by his own principles and instead try to steer the ship in whatever direction the majority wants to take it. As the slightly altered saying goes, you can please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. U.S. fighter jets were called to Vancouver International Airport after a small plane was allegedly hijacked by a climate activist in Victoria before it flew circles around the airport for nearly half an hour. The man who allegedly seized the Cessna 172 aircraft in Victoria on Tuesday has been charged with hijacking and terrorism offenses. The pilot is believed to be a former commercial airline pilot based in Victoria named Shahir Qasim, who had previously been involved in climate activism. In 2012, Qasim held a news conference in Victoria at the start of a cross-country bicycle trek to raise awareness of global warming. Shortly thereafter, Qasim posted to Facebook claiming that he was a, quote, messenger from Allah, and that, quote, humans will go extinct within a few years. The post further stated, quote, I am the Messiah sent to save humanity from climate change and usher in a new era of world peace. Police in Richmond received a report that the small plane had been hijacked and was on its way to Vancouver around 1 p.m. Vancouver Air Traffic Control first mentioned a, quote, rogue aircraft around the same time, asking nearby aircraft to watch for the Cessna and relay to controllers should they need to maneuver as necessary. The incident resulted in what the Vancouver airport called a 39-minute ground stop for arrival. So, Cosmin, the irony of someone protesting climate action and stealing a jet to circle around, wasting all that jet fuel, is not lost on me, at least. And let's put aside the references to Allah and the Messiah complex that's inherent in this story. But, you know, we hear from hate experts such as Barbara Perry from the Ontario Tech University that left-wing extremism isn't an issue in the West. Is she right, or is there a blind spot for left-wing violence among the political elites?
No, she's absolutely wrong. There are prevalent examples of left-wing extremism, even annually on Canadian streets. You only have to look at Montreal on Labor Day. There is an annual Antifa far-left rally, and they go and smash store windows and engage in scuffles with the police. But even beyond that, there simply isn't an interest at the political level to investigate left-wing extremism. I've actually put in ATIPs to Public Safety Canada that turn up empty when you're looking for things like Antifa or left-wing extremism. They simply do not care to investigate. But there's plenty of examples of far-left, especially eco-terrorist actions for decades in North America. You only have to look at groups like the Weather Underground in the United States, which historically bombed government buildings in the name of social and eco-justice. And in more recent years, this is more prevalent in Europe, but we have seen similar tactics expressed here in Canada, but particularly British Columbia. There's movements like Extinction Rebellion and Last Generation, which sometimes have crossed the line from peaceful protest into outright sabotage, blocking emergency vehicles, damaging infrastructure, causing disruptions on highways and risking public safety altogether, all in the name of climate action. So no, Barbara Perry is not right. There is a pattern of politically motivated violence on the far left and the eco-left, and there's simply a refusal to acknowledge this as a reality. A CBC report published Wednesday has sparked debate after alleging that a rise in male interest in online personalities associated with the so-called Manosphere, like podcaster Joe Rogan, is becoming an increasingly common factor in divorce proceedings. The state broadcaster's article highlights the views of Swift Current-based family lawyer Scott Byers, who claims he is seeing a, quote, new and unsettling dynamic in his legal practice, men allegedly adopting misogynistic views that he argues are encouraged by online male influencers. Byers told the CBC, quote, "It's not the same man that woman met years ago," He puts his earbuds in and he's listening to these podcast thinkers associated with the so-called Manosphere. The term Manosphere, as used by the state broadcaster, refers to a collection of online influencers that discuss masculinity, gender roles, and men's affairs, often critical of feminism in their content. CBC's article links this online environment to increase in divorce filings, citing examples where men allegedly adopted traditional values after engaging with content from the Joe Rogan podcast or others. Anecdotal accounts in the report include one woman who said her American partner began to ridicule and control her after consuming Manosphere content. Another case involved a man who reportedly changed his views on parenting after being injured on the job and spending more time online. Clayton, how much of a public interest story is this, and how do you think Canadians feel about the CBC dedicating time and taxpayer resources to going after podcasters like Joe Rogan?
Yeah, so a lot of critics are saying that it certainly wasn't a public interest story enough to warrant taking taxpayer funds to make it. Some critics of the report called the move politically loaded, as many criticisms of the CBC say, right? And it was an attempt to marginalize valid male perspectives, which stray from the accepted social orthodoxy that we see on the left, like speaking about gender and relationships in a way that is just unacceptable to folks such as the CBC. Others brought up the apparent double standard, saying that the CBC would never have run an article blaming feminism for high divorce rates. A lot of people were also upset that the article tries to link people like Joe Rogan with influencers, for lack of a better term, such as Andrew Tate. So Tate seems to espouse these anti-gender equality views, most likely as a bit of a joke or played up for the cameras, whereas Joe Rogan has female guests on his show, talks about the female comedians and athletes that he likes as a comedian and a sports commentator. And he always speaks very highly of his relationship with his daughters and his wife. So the idea that he is a misogynist on a comparable level to Andrew Tate is absurd to many commentators online. Others also noted that in divorce, there are likely many other issues. I'm reading things from Reddit that were saying this, that, you know, there's other issues going on when a marriage is failing. And it's ridiculous to blame one type of media the husband happened to be consuming on the breakup of a marriage. We've seen this before with the CBC. Right after the 2024 election, the CBC even had the openly Marxist and much criticized Hassan Piker on their podcast to break down the shortcomings of the election. And even Piker didn't lay all the blame solely at the feet of the mostly unconnected group of successful podcasters.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. While you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.